Has MLB The Show franchise gotten a little bit predictable and repetitive and boring? Well, I am here to help you. Today I'm going to go over the best settings, sliders, roster, setup, and everything in between when you are starting up a franchise mode in MLB The Show 25. One of the big issues I have is that younger prospects who are already in the league, they don't necessarily develop that quickly. There's a lot of instances where top prospects become star-level players right away. We've seen it time and time again in recent years, and that doesn't really happen in MLB The Show. So I recommend that you download my roster by typing in my PSN on the Vault search, and you're going to want to make sure it says online ID rather than name. I got a little confused with that. From there, you will find my roster, and then you can download it. Now, as I go over everything here today, you can technically use any roster you want, but I recommend my roster because I think the rating scale is going to make your franchises a little bit more unpredictable, realistic, and enjoyable. Now, admittedly, there are some bad ratings here. For example, with my Detroit Tigers, I think Riley Green is pretty clearly a better player overall than Kerry Carpenter. Carpenter had a higher overall rating, though. So I boosted Riley Green a little bit, but I didn't want to do too much. And if there are other changes that you want to make to the rating, certainly feel free. I was more so focused on some of the younger guys, particularly some of the top prospects, like Roman Anthony, for instance. Anthony is the second highest ranked prospect right now in Major League Baseball, and assuming all goes well, he should become a really good player at the big league level quite soon for the Boston Red Sox. The problem is that doesn't really happen in MLB The Show because he doesn't progress quick enough. I did a couple test simulations to see how he would do with some of the regular settings, sliders, and his rating in the base roster, and as you can see, he doesn't really develop all that well. He's only got one season of over 100 games. Never really was all that impressive offensively. I did a separate 7-year simulation with the same settings, the same base ratings, and admittedly, he's turned into a really good player. But not with the Red Sox, with the Athletics, because for whatever reason, Boston must have traded him away, which they would never do in real life. We're going to talk about unrealistic trades and how to avoid them in just a moment. But what I did with Roman Anthony is I upped his rating. He's originally a 67 in the base roster. I moved him to a 71 here, and I did it with a lot of the other top prospects across Major League Baseball. That way they can progress quicker, sort of like real life. I did a 3-year simulation with my ratings and my settings. He's already become an 81 overall. The Red Sox kept him in the minors through 2025, which is fine. Debuted in 2026, run the Rookie of the Year. Now, admittedly, some of his offensive numbers, other than the walks, weren't really much better from his rookie year to his second year, but his WAR did double. I think the cool thing about baseball is that certain players, there's a lot of ebbs and flows. There's a lot of changes in terms of stats on a year-by-year basis. So if the stats are not exactly how you think they should be, that doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong. I did fix a handful of the ratings for minor league players. For instance, Carson Williams of the Rays has very low power ratings. He really shouldn't. He's averaged over 20 home runs per season in each of the last 3 years in minor league baseball. I also fixed some of the durabilities. Zach Wheeler's been one of the most durable pitchers in Major League Baseball over the last 6 or 7 years. Yet his durability rating is only a 40. Compare that to Jacob deGrom, who in my opinion is probably the best pitcher, peak for peak, I've ever seen. But the guy cannot stay on the field. He has not played more than 15 games since 2019. Yet his durability, for whatever reason, is like a 72. I'm thinking of moving a lot of the pitchers' durabilities down to add more realistic injuries because, well, pitchers get hurt often in baseball, especially in the big 2025. So that's the logic for the roster that I'm using. We're going to do a test simulation here to go through some of the settings once we're inside a franchise. I'm going to pick the Dodgers here because I need a team that I know is going to make the playoffs, and I'll explain why later in the video. From here, you get some of your first look at certain settings. I would turn GM contracts off if you want to make sure you stay with your current team through the entire duration of your franchise. If you want to give yourself an extra challenge and fight for your job, be my guest. That setting, along with many others, you can change as you wish for your personal preference. You can turn fantasy draft on here. You can go back to the old rules with just the DH in the American League or no extra inning runners rule. I prefer the new rules when it comes to those, but it's your franchise. You can manage it how you wish. From here, we get to certain tasks, such as setting your lineup, scouting, and making roster moves. This is where you can turn it on manual or auto based on how much you want to do. I like to control everything in my franchises, so I keep everything here on manual. But if you want to put some things on auto, you certainly can. And if you're not sure which settings you want on auto and manual, don't sweat it. You can change them at any time. From there, we get to the custom game entry conditions. I would click skip and set later. We're going to talk about this in a couple of minutes. From there, you can choose either spring training or regular season. Whichever you prefer. For this, we're just going to go in the regular season. So let's go back to some of the settings that you can keep on auto or manual based on how much or how little control you want of your team. You would go into settings and then mode specific, and from there, you can have everything you want on manual. If you don't want to go through scouting, for instance, you can put that on auto. Let's talk about sliders now. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of sliders relating to player progression and whatnot, unlike 2K and even Madden. In terms of simulation, I think the sliders that matter here are gameplay and simulator injury frequency, and then trade frequency. For the injuries, I like to put those all the way at the max because I don't think there's enough injuries in comparison to real life. Now, obviously, if you don't want injuries, you can push those farther back. And to be completely honest, I don't think there's that much of a difference in terms of having the simulator injury frequency on default compared to having it far to the right. But I like to have injuries because I think it makes things more realistic. As for trade frequency, the trades in this game are sometimes hilariously stupid. So what I would do is I would probably push it more towards the left. But if you want your league to have complete chaos, again, that's entirely up to you. But in terms of realism, I would push it to the left. But what if you still want trades around your league, especially big trades near the trade deadline? Well, this is how you can make trades manually for other teams. I'm going to go more into detail about this in a separate video in terms of how to have fun by doing small different things in your franchise modes, but I will go over this here. So let's say you look at the Atlanta Braves. They're having a good season, but they need one more starting pitcher. And you come across, say, Zach Eflin with the Baltimore Orioles. Let's say in this hypothetical scenario, the Orioles are not having that good of a season, but Eflin is playing pretty well. Since he's on the last year of his contract, maybe the Orioles would be looking to trade him for prospects. This right here is manually how you would work a trade for Eflin to go to the Braves. So first you're going to want to push his stats all the way to 0, or at least some of his stats. I would write these down, so that way you remember his stats later when you're going back to fix it. As you can imagine, he doesn't have a lot of trade value. I'm going to have to trade 2 decent players to make the budget work since we're using the Dodgers. From there, we're going to give Zach Eflin his stats back. He's back to being an 83 overall. And we're going to trade him to the Braves for a package of prospects. And this can be subjected based on how you feel what would be a pretty fair offer for a guy like Zach Eflin. From there, we're going to trade the prospects to the Orioles for the 2 players who we traded for Zach Eflin. So our team remains unchanged. And we made the swap with Zach Eflin going to Atlanta and the prospects to the Orioles. Let's talk about gameplay settings now. Some people like to play all 162 games. More power to you. Some people don't play games at all. They just simulate. But if you play any amount of games during your season, your settings are going to need to be pretty important. You got to find the right hitting and pitching settings for you, along with camera angles. That's especially important for baseball. And then difficulty as well. My recommendation is don't pick the hard ones just because they're the hard ones. You got to find the right one for you. You can also use the dynamic difficulties, which change based on how you're playing. I'm personally not a huge fan of it, but again, to each their own. In terms of sliders then, I think contact, power, timing, and solid hits are the important ones. But if you use quick counts, I would recommend pushing foul frequency towards the bottom and then human stamina a little bit higher. Maybe not all the way to the top, but probably 1 or 2 notches up. From there, we're going to talk about custom game entry. This was added last year, and I think this is an awesome feature to where you don't have to play full games, but you can hop in to the critical situations of your season. What I would recommend if you want to play maybe around a third of the games is to push the meter pretty high. Earliest inning would be around the 7th, and then do the player highlight moments. Let's simulate and let's see an example. Mookie Betts has 2 home runs today. Let's make it 3. Well, unfortunately, we do not get a third home run, but we do get a base hit, a pretty good at bat, a 108-mile-an-hour single into right field. So Mookie Betts gets his single. Most of these scenarios are going to be more so in close games and in high leverage situations. This scenario more so is for a player milestone. You may or may not be involved in the potential final out. Is that a threat? Anyway, I think the game assumes you are still player locked with Mookie Betts. This must be a little bit different because I don't think it was like this last year, so it seems like they've added to it a little bit. So I guess we're going to have a chance to record the final out here of Mookie Betts at shortstop. You can also play first-person defense now, which I find kind of cool. Doesn't look like we'll be part of the final out. It's a liner to left, and it'll be caught by Teoscar Hernandez. And so the Dodgers win it 8-4. 2-home run game for Mookie Betts. You hopped into the situation there. You played a big spot in a big opportunity for Mookie. And that's a fun way to play the critical moments of your season without it dragging on and taking too slow. Let's simulate to the playoffs now. The Dodgers won 112 games because, of course. The playoffs can drag on a little bit, though, because it's a lot of games. So let's say you don't want to play these full games, but you want to hop in to as much of the action as possible since it's the playoffs. Well, what I did for the final season at the Giants franchise last year is I pushed these all the way down. I would put the little meter in between low and medium. Earliest inning, why not the first inning? That way you can play in just about every game. You don't have to play the full game, but you can play all of the important situations as the game goes along. So let's simulate here through game one. Hopping in the third inning. 2 on, 2 out. Big opportunity for Atlanta's offense, and you've got to get a stop. There's different situations like that throughout the entire game. Let's simulate the playoffs. Let's see who wins the World Series. Shocker, shocker, it's the Dodgers. The Phillies blew a 3-1 lead. That is kind of embarrassing. So there you go. Those are some settings that I would recommend for MLB The Show franchise this year in terms of getting your roster together, in terms of managing your team, in terms of injuries, trades, gameplay, critical situations, all that fun stuff. Now, I'm going to have another video within the next week or so going over how to have a fun franchise experience. I've done this before on EA College Football, Madden, and NBA 2K, basically going over some of the little things that you can do to make your franchise more enjoyable and less stale. Whether you enjoy playing realistically like I do, or more so just for fun, maybe a little bit more casually, we're going to go over all of it in that video, so make sure to stay tuned for that. If there's anything I missed here, feel free to mention it in the comments, and I'll probably mention it in that video as well. So that'll wrap up the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new and excited for more MLB The Show 25 franchise content.